Hello again from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This is Spill Speak. We're going to talk about a couple different things today, and it's going to be a little bit off the norm. First of all, what I'd like to do is invite everybody that's currently a friend of Spill Speak to talk to all your friends and get them to come over to the site. One of the things that we're also going to talk about today is going to be the health and safety monitoring and the health and safety aspect of spill response. You're starting to see a lot of that in the media. But first, I want to say that we've had an exclusive invitation from senior Coast Guard members in the Incident Command Center that have invited Spill Speak to come in and interview their senior staff at 3 different locations here on the Gulf Coast. We're going to be going to Mobile, Alabama. We're going to be in the command center at Houma, Louisiana, and we're also going to be in the command center at New Orleans, Louisiana. So that should be very interesting and exciting. If any of you have questions or comments or subject matter that you'd like addressed during these interviews, please respond to Spill Speak and let us know what you're interested in, and we'll try to get that into the conversation. So that's exciting, and we're also working on some other high level interviews that should be coming up here in the near future. So we'll keep you posted on that. Now, the other thing that we're going to discuss here today, very briefly, this is not going to be in depth, but it will be give you a brief overview, and that is the health and safety aspects of working on an oil spill. When we talk about exposure, the first thing that we have to understand is that there are a lot of different exposures when you're talking about crude oil and or dispersants. You're hearing people becoming ill or sick, and they don't know, but they believe it may be due to some type of an exposure. We don't know if it's crude oil. We don't know if it's dispersants. We don't know. It could be the exhaust from the vessel they're working on. There's a lot of different things out there. It could be heat stress. We never hear anything in the media about heat stress, and I personally believe that's a very serious issue that may or may not be being addressed down here. And we'll talk about that in upcoming issues. The other thing is when we talk about exposure, we have to talk about how are we being exposed. There are 4 primary routes of entry into the body when we're talking about being exposed to any type of a chemical or a compound. One of the first ones is injection. And when we talk about injection, we're talking about something typically under pressure. A form of injection would be possibly a high pressure line with some type of a chemical or a compound inside of it. And under that pressure, if something was to rupture, it could break the skin and inject it. Possibly a paint can, something as simple as that, could puncture the skin and inject a toxin, excuse me. So there's a lot of ways of being injected, but that's not our primary concern on the spill response. Ingestion is another form of exposure, and a form of ingestion would be maybe you go out and you handle tar balls on the beach like you see the media doing without any gloves, and then they turn around, walk up the beach, and have themselves a hamburger without washing their hands. That could be a way of ingesting some type of a hazard or a toxin. So there are ways of ingesting it besides just eating it or drinking it, because none of us are going to do that, I hope. Inhalation. That's probably one of the most common forms of exposure. And obviously you can see how you would inhale something as a vapor. Now, when we talk about inhalation hazards, there's a lot of different variables that can contribute to that. Some of these vapors will rise in the heat. Some of them will behave differently. So there's a lot of things that come into play on inhalation, and we're going to talk about how you prevent yourself from these exposures here in just a minute. And the other one is absorption. And that, again, would be an example of where you put your hands in something without some type of a protection or a glove or whatever it may be, and these items are readily absorbed into the bloodstream through breaking down through the skin. So then we have to talk about, now that we've identified the 4 primary routes of entry, how do we protect ourselves against it? Well, when we talk about hazard prevention, there are 3 different ways of preventing a hazard from happening. And they are: 1, an administrative control. An administrative control could be barrier tape, it could be a sign, it could be training, something that says, don't do this. That would be a form of protecting yourself against a hazard. One of the other ones is engineering controls. We try to implement engineering controls so that we can eliminate a hazard. Good ventilation, that would be an engineering control. So there are things that we can engineer our way when we are talking about a hazard that can engineer the hazard away or at least minimize it. It may not eliminate it, but we can minimize the hazards through good engineering. And the last one, and the one that you hear the most about, is personal protective equipment, or referred to as PPE. And when we talk about personal protective equipment, that comes in a lot of forms. That could be safety glasses, hard hats, steel-toe boots. There's a myriad of things that come under the category of PPE. And respirators, some of these suits that you see out there. But personal protective equipment is only as good as the way that you wear it or apply it. If you are given a respirator, for instance, to go out and deal with something that's potentially hazard, as an inhalation hazard, then if you're wearing it down around your neck, it's not doing you any good. If you are given a pair of gloves to protect yourself from an absorption of a potentially hazardous material, and you choose not to wear the gloves, again, it's not doing any good. So there's a lot that comes into play on how we protect ourselves, how we implement this protection. And coming up here this week, we're going to also be talking about the monitoring of hazardous materials. Because when we monitor, we can determine whether or not the potential for those hazards exists. And there's a lot of different types of monitoring. It's very misunderstood. When you hear the media talk about monitoring, they'll say, well, the air is being monitored. Well, and I'm sure it is, but is it being monitored for the same constituents that we're trying to protect ourselves against? Is it being monitored in the location where these workers are working? There's a lot that comes into play here. We're going to try and break that down into layman's terms and discuss some of the monitoring equipment, some of the fallacies of monitoring, when monitoring is applicable, when it's not. So stay tuned with us. Again, we're going to be moving our operation over into Florida here in the next 48 hours. So there won't be a break in the action as far as the reports, but once we get over to Pensacola, we've already made arrangements to get set up there, and we should be able to up our professionalism a little bit. I appreciate you bearing with us, and we're going to continue to upgrade our product and continue to seek out the truth about what's really happening down here on the spill. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again here on Spill Speak.